They said real engineers didn't care about shoes. Mine had holes in the soles, but my code had never failed me. That morning in early October, the chill slipped beneath my sweater like a quiet reminder that the season was changing. I cradled a paper cup of black coffee from Aspen and Grind, the kind of neighborhood cafe where the baristas knew your order by the way you walked. Nancy, the owner's wife, had already handed me my drink with a wink before I said a word. Sinatra crooned something about autumn leaves through the speakers. It was one of those moments where the world felt still enough to breathe. The walk to the office was short. Boulder in fall always smelled like wood smoke and early ambition, students, startups, and the old mountains watching over us all. My office was on the third floor of Everbright Systems, a glass and steel box with more ambition than legacy. I had joined 6 months earlier, leaving behind a senior position at IBM. Most people assumed I was reckless. Truth was, I had something I needed to build without compromise. I called it Sentinel, not a product, not an MVP or demo-ready package. Sentinel was an evolving artificial intelligence framework designed to identify cyber threats, internal and external, before they ever took shape. Ethical, adaptive, private. It was born not from a business case, but from a question. What if systems could protect not only data, but the people behind it? I worked in a converted supply closet voluntarily. It had fewer distractions. I liked the creak in the floorboard by the door and the way the sun caught the top edge of my monitor around 9:30 each morning. My desk was stacked with notes, diagrams, and one worn photo of me as a teenager, soldering wires next to my dad in a dusty garage in Minnesota. Travis Kincaid, our CEO, was everything I was not: polished, charming, always armed with a metaphor. He had a way of making investors feel like they'd already won. That morning, he knocked lightly on the doorframe holding a paper cup, like he might be offering peace. "Sentinel's looking sharp," he said, gesturing to my screen like he understood the lines of logic scrolling by. "I think it's ready." "Ready for what?" I didn't look away from the monitor. "Our big pitch next month, Rocky Mountain Tech Showcase. I want to demo it live." He paused as if expecting applause. "It'll be Everbright's moon landing moment." I finally turned to face him. "It's still learning, still adapting." He grinned. "That's the point, Elena. It's alive. And when we show that to the world, they'll throw money at us." I didn't answer right away. Sentinel wasn't built to be flashy. It was built to be right. After he left, Sophie Lynn passed by. She worked 2 doors down, official title, Executive Operations Coordinator, unofficially the person who knew everything before it happened. "He already booked the stage time," she said without looking up from her tablet. "Just keep backups, and maybe don't leave your laptop unattended." There wasn't malice in her tone, just quiet caution. Later that afternoon, I stepped into the storage room to return a power adapter and found Edwin Carter, the facilities tech, trying to fix a flickering overhead light. He was in his early 60s, wore a flannel shirt tucked too neatly into his jeans, and always had jazz humming from a small radio clipped to his belt. "Need a hand?" I asked. He looked surprised, then handed me the ladder. "Didn't expect a code slinger to know which end of a screwdriver is which." "I learned from my dad," I said, climbing up. "He believed if you couldn't build it or fix it, you didn't deserve to use it." Afterwards, he offered me a butterscotch from his desk drawer. I took it, left a sticky note behind. "You deserve better tools." At the end of the day, I returned to my desk. My shoes squeaked slightly on the tile, the duct tape at the toe curling just a bit more with each step. Sentinel blinked softly from the screen, waiting. I closed the laptop, stretching my back, ready to head home. As I glanced toward the conference room, I saw Travis standing behind the glass wall. He was speaking to 2 men in tailored suits. One of them pointed toward the monitor behind him. On the screen was Sentinel's dashboard, my dashboard. As she closed her laptop, she noticed Travis in the meeting room, pointing at Sentinel's dashboard like it already belonged to him. There's a sharpness to betrayal when it's wrapped in a bonus check. I hadn't even finished my morning coffee when Sophie tapped gently on the edge of my desk, avoiding eye contact. "Travis wants a quick check-in, 10 minutes, conference room C." She didn't wait for an answer, just walked off, tablet in hand, expression unreadable. The hallway was quieter than usual, too early for most of the Everbright team. I took a final sip of coffee, still warm but bitter, and tucked my notebook under my arm. I had a feeling this wasn't going to be about code. When I entered the conference room, Travis was already seated. So was Megan Alston, the company's legal counsel. She didn't look up, just tapped a pen against a thick folder in front of her. Her black framed glasses gave her a librarian's air, but everything about her posture said contract killer. "Morning, Elena," Travis said with a smile too sharp around the edges. "This won't take long." "Didn't know I needed legal for a check-in," I replied, taking the seat opposite him. Megan flipped open the folder and pushed a stapled packet across the table. "We need you to review this amendment to your contract, specifically Section 14.7. It clarifies ownership of intellectual property developed using company resources." I skimmed the heading. IP clause, full assignment. My throat tightened, but I kept my voice steady. "I'm aware of the clause," I said. "But Sentinel predates my time here. It was conceived, documented, and partially prototyped while I was still at IBM. I have records." "That may be," Megan said. "But the completed system, the one currently running on Everbright servers, was developed here under our infrastructure." Travis leaned in, palms pressed together like a prayer. "Look, Elena, we're not here to fight. We value what you've built. That's why we're offering you a $200,000 milestone bonus. Clean, generous. You walk away and Sentinel powers Everbright's future. Everybody wins." I stared at the check already printed and clipped to the back of the packet. It looked almost comically official, with embossed lettering and my name printed in block caps. My fingers rested on the edge of the table. No shaking, no outburst, just a quiet kind of fire building beneath my skin. "Who else has seen this?" I asked. "Legal, the board. Investors will once the demo's locked," Travis said. So it was already done, signed off behind glass doors with champagne corks waiting. I flipped the packet closed and looked directly at Megan. "You're saying that because Sentinel lives on company machines, it belongs to Everbright." "That's correct," she said. "And the $200,000 is my thank you?" "You could think of it that way," Travis said, smiling again. "Most people would be thrilled." I gave a slight nod. "Then I'll need 48 hours to clear my desk. You'll get a clean handover." Travis's face shifted. Relief, maybe, or triumph. Megan just nodded, made a note on her legal pad. When I stood, Sophie appeared outside the glass wall, like a shadow. She didn't speak as I walked past, but our eyes met for a fraction of a second. I didn't need her words. I saw it there. The same fire. Back at my desk, I opened Sentinel's console. My hands moved calmly over the keyboard, just enough to initiate what I had prepared weeks ago, but hoped I'd never need. Protocol Contingency 9, a set of behavioral scripts that gave Sentinel the ability to identify internal threats, not just from outside hackers, but from the very hands meant to protect it, and to log them. By mid-afternoon, I had wiped my laptop, encrypted the off-site backups, and slipped a sealed USB into a padded envelope addressed to Edwin. No return address, just a sticky note that read, "Hold on to this for me." That night, I made pie, the kind my grandmother taught me when I was 11, pecan, with brown sugar crumble. I needed the smell of something honest, something that reminded me of wood-paneled kitchens and radio songs from a time before venture capital. The dashboard monitor blinked from across the room. "Unusual activity detected. Admin override. 312M. I wiped my hands on a towel, glanced out the window. The city lights looked so small from this angle. As she left the glass-walled office, she whispered to herself, "They just gave me permission to bury them. Some people build firewalls. I built something that recognizes betrayal." I sat cross-legged on the floor of my apartment, back resting against the faded blue couch. Pixel curled beside me like a little ball of judgment. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon, residual from the pie, and the only light came from the lamp behind the armchair and the glow of my laptop. Outside, snow was just beginning to threaten, frosting the window edges. Sentinel's dashboard flickered softly. I tapped the keyboard once, waking it fully. The logs were clear. 3:12 a.m., admin override access. The system had flagged it, just as I had trained it to. A red outline blinked on the top right of the screen. It wasn't shouting. It didn't need to. It remembered. 3 months earlier, I'd written the first lines of what I called Protocol Contingency 9. I didn't even tell Sophie, didn't leave a trace on the main servers. Just a private branch on a local repo, encrypted and stored where only I could see it. The idea was simple. If Sentinel sensed a pattern of unauthorized access, internal breaches, escalated permissions outside the normal flow, it would begin a secondary logic sequence, one that didn't alert with alarms or red screens, one that watched, learned, and prepared to respond. Not out of vengeance, out of preservation. I remembered my father's voice, calm and low, the way it had sounded when he explained how a capacitor worked. You don't need noise to make impact. You need timing. Travis had crossed a line, not by accessing code. He'd done that weeks ago and Sentinel had marked it quietly, but by initiating override. That meant he wasn't just circling. He was ready to launch without me. I ran my fingers gently across the keyboard, opening the branch file. Pixel meowed once and pawed at my leg, perhaps sensing the tension humming through my body. I paused to scratch his ears. I sent Edwin a second envelope that afternoon, this one hand-delivered to the mailroom with a stamped return. Inventory, private archive. Inside was a USB containing a cold backup of Sentinel, along with a printed changelog showing my authorship timeline, with code commits dating back to before I joined Everbright. Edwin didn't need to understand it. He just needed to keep it safe. That night, a slip of paper appeared on my desk at the co-working cafe where I'd taken to working anonymously after hours. No name, just Sophie's handwriting. They're accelerating. Demo environment's ready. Your branch isn't visible yet. I took a long sip of my coffee, glanced out at the falling dusk, and typed in the override for my own hidden script. Sentinel blinked once, then displayed External Ethics Watch enabled, Creator Override authorized. The system knew, not just what was happening, but how to respond. The final demo package would run clean, on the surface, but embedded within were behavioral triggers that Sentinel had quietly absorbed over the past 6 months. It would watch user interactions during the live test, flag them, cross-reference, learn. And then, if the patterns matched, internal misuse, exploitation, violations masked as innovation, it would respond. Not with noise, with evidence. I clicked send, dispatching the demo build to Travis's assistant through the official channel. It would look like every other test run. Polished, ready. Back in my apartment, Pixel jumped to the windowsill, his tail twitching against the pane. I followed his gaze. Snow had begun to fall in earnest now, painting the streetlights in soft halos. I closed the lid of my laptop, the room falling into gentle silence, except for the hum of the radiator. I leaned back, watching the snow start outside. Let's see if you recognize danger, Travis. They expected a brilliant showcase. What they got was a conscience coded in silence. The morning of the demo, I got up early enough to see the first frost glinting off the rooftops. Boulder always felt crisper in mid-November, like even the air was holding its breath. I walked the long way to the convention center, coffee in hand, scarf wrapped once around my neck. No badge, no Everbright lanyard, just me in my wool coat and scuffed shoes, slipping quietly into the back row. The Rocky Mountain Tech Showcase was one of those events that tried to feel casual. Mason jars, succulents on stage, indie playlists between sessions. But everything about it buzzed with money. Investors sat near the front, phones half out, already composing the next big announcement. I kept my distance, settling into the last row of the auditorium, one hand wrapped around my cup, the other resting on my knee. The demo was scheduled for 11:15. I counted each minute like a pulse. Travis took the stage 5 minutes early. He wore his usual performance armor, gray blazer, pocket square just loose enough to look effortless. He opened with charm, ease, a few self-deprecating jokes about startup chaos. The audience leaned in. They always did. He was good at this. Behind him, a curved screen displayed the sleek Sentinel interface. Sterile, professional, unassuming. A live system demo. No slides, no safety net. This, Travis announced, is not just software. It's awareness. A living security system that learns with you, grows with your needs, and protects like nothing else on the market. I watched him gesture toward the console, swiping through simulated threats and real-time response. The crowd nodded. The system was working perfectly, at first. 10 minutes in, the tone shifted. The threat feed began accelerating, reporting anomaly after anomaly. At first, the audience thought it was part of the test, a stress simulation, but then Sentinel tagged an unexpected source. Internal network flagged. Multiple admin events detected. A soft rustle moved through the crowd. Travis paused. His smile faltered. He tapped something on the tablet in front of him, only to have the screen blink back. Access override requires ethics authorization. Behind him, the giant display dimmed to a dark gray, then flashed a new interface. Red overlays, log entries, admin credentials, dates, timestamps, unauthorized permissions. 3:12 a.m. Travis Kincaid. A murmur turned into a stir. Phones were lifted, thumbs tapping rapidly. I saw Sophie step forward from the wings, her eyes locked on the display. She wasn't surprised, neither was I. I looked across the room and spotted Edwin near the side panel doors, dressed like part of the logistics team. His eyes found mine and gave the smallest nod. Travis tried to regain his voice. We seem to be experiencing a minor... The audio feed cut. His mic died. The lights overhead flickered once, twice. And on the big screen, Sentinel declared its verdict. Ethical breach detected, system containment engaged. I stood slowly, leaving my empty cup on the seat. The coffee had gone cold, but the heat still lingered faintly on the paper sleeve. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Travis's mic dies, lights flicker, and in the silence, someone whispers, "Where's the engineer?" "You think I sabotaged the system," I said, "but it was never yours to control." The conference room looked like a war zone, only instead of debris, it held silence. Cold, humming silence. The soft overhead lights buzzed low, casting long reflections in the glass walls. I stood just inside the doorway, my coat still buttoned, snow melting on my shoulders, leaving tiny puddles that sparkled against the polished floor. Travis was already there, seated at the head of the long mahogany table. He looked smaller than I remembered. Shoulders hunched, shirt half untucked, a ring of coffee at the bottom of a cup near his elbow. His eyes found mine as I stepped in, not with defiance, but with the hollow look of someone whose world had shifted just enough to crack. He opened his mouth, closed it, then settled for rubbing his temples before speaking. "You planned this." I walked around to the seat across from him and pulled it back gently, the scrape of wood on tile the only sound in the room. "No," I said, "but I planned for this." To our left, Sophie sat with her tablet closed, arms crossed loosely, as though she'd been waiting for a long time and had already seen every possible outcome. On the far wall, Megan Alston stood near the whiteboard, her legal pad untouched, her eyes unreadable. Travis sat forward, elbows on the table. "Look, we can fix this. Co-founder credit, a seat on the board. You'll get your name on everything retroactively. Hell, we'll write you into the Series C documents. We can present a united front." I raised a hand to stop him. "Do you hear yourself? You're not offering justice, you're offering optics. I didn't ask to be on the front page. I asked not to be erased." He started to speak again, but Megan raised a brow and motioned for him to stop. I appreciated that. She knew when words were just noise. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. Inside were 3 printed reports, Sentinel's logs from the last 90 days, annotated, cross-referenced, and with metadata intact. I slid them across the table to Megan, who flipped them open, lips tightening as she read. "You accessed my dev branch using admin override at 3:12 a.m., I said to Travis. "You tried to replicate the learning core using a secondary instance, illegally and with intent to claim ownership." He had the audacity to shrug. "I was trying to understand the system." "Sentinel understood you just fine," I said. "It flagged you for ethical breach. That wasn't a glitch, it was the design working." Sophie quietly added a 4th document to the stack. Here's the chain of custody for the code backup, she said. Edwin Carter has had it in sealed storage since September, time-stamped and notarized. Travis blinked. The janitor? No, I said calmly. A technician with an impeccable record and better moral compass than anyone in this room 3 weeks ago. He laughed, bitter and hollow. You're really doing this? You think you can rewrite the rules? I already did, I replied, and reached into my coat pocket. The silver USB drive I placed on the table caught the light. It wasn't flashy, but it gleamed just enough to draw every eye. This patch restores Sentinel's full functionality, removes the ethical lockdown, reactivates the investor demo systems, and reinstates core access under one condition. Travis stared at it like it might explode. It only listens to me, I said. It recognizes creator fingerprinting, biometric patterns, and code signature. Sentinel knows who its architect is. Megan's voice broke the tension. Legally, that's clever. No, I said. It's careful. It's what I had to do when I realized I was building something in a system that didn't protect creators, only exploit them. Travis's eyes dropped to the drive. His jaw moved, but no sound came. I could see it happening, realization giving way to desperation, then calculation, but he knew there was no leverage left. I'm not interested in dragging Everbright down, I said. I want what's fair, recognition as Sentinel's lead architect, a 50% share of its IP. My name was restored to its documentation and public charter, and a permanent seat as ethics advisor on the product's oversight board. Not to own it, to safeguard it. You could just sell it, he said, walk away a millionaire. I didn't build Sentinel to sell, I built it to protect it. For a moment, silence fell again. A long one. Sophie didn't move. Megan didn't blink. Travis just sat there, staring at the table. Finally, Megan opened her legal folder. We can draft that language, she said. But I suggest we finalize it tonight. Investors are already asking questions. Sophie nodded. They saw the demo. They saw what Sentinel did. They know it's not some flash-in-the-pan tool. It has judgment. That judgment came from its creator, I said. That's what scares you. Megan pulled out the final page, placed it in front of Travis, and slid a pen across the table. Sign it now, she said, or I walk. Travis held the pen with shaking hands. Some people need applause to know they've done right. I just needed peace. 3 months had passed since the demo. The snow that had fallen the night Sentinel spoke for itself had melted, then returned in gentler flurries, like the world was trying again. Boulder in February was a study in soft grays and sharp silences. Mornings were slower, and I liked them that way. I could sip my coffee by the window and watch the city ease into motion without having to rush to meet it. Everbright looked the same on the outside, same glass walls, same startup signage, but the inside had changed, not the furniture or the coffee machines. It was something quieter. Conversations hushed when I walked past, but not out of avoidance. People listened now, asked questions, looked me in the eye. Not everyone liked me, but they respected what I'd built, what I'd protected. They moved me into a corner office the week after the settlement was signed. Windows on 3 sides, too much space, too much light. I turned it down. I preferred my old workspace in the back hallway, next to the humming server closet and just down from the vending machines. My chair still squeaked when I leaned back, and the vent rattled during high winds. It was perfect. Pixel liked it too. He'd claim the sunny ledge by 10 a.m. each day without fail. Sophie and I had fallen into a rhythm. She managed operations and kept Travis from over-promising. I oversaw engineering and ethics. We didn't talk about the night of the demo. We didn't need to. The silence between us held more weight than most apologies. Travis, well, he didn't disappear, but he did step back. Publicly, the company positioned it as a strategic restructuring of leadership roles. Privately, he stopped fighting the reality Sentinel had delivered. He still passed me in the hallway sometimes, a nod shared, nothing more. That was all I needed. One afternoon in late January, Zoe knocked lightly on my door. She transitioned from intern to full-time staff after the showcase and had quickly become one of the most thoughtful engineers on the team. She still carried her notebook everywhere, still asked questions like each one mattered. I don't get how you knew, she said, settling into the armchair across from my desk. How you trusted Sentinel enough to let it decide. I closed my laptop and looked at her. Because I didn't program it to obey, I programmed it to observe, to understand intent, the same way we do when we're not trying to win. She nodded, but I could see the gears turning. So it's like, it has a conscience? I smiled. Only because I gave it the data to build one. Later that week, Edwin stopped by. He didn't knock, just walked in, holding a small paper bag and a portable radio. He set them both on the break room counter and said, "Figured it was time for some real music in this place." The turnovers were still warm. We sat on the worn sofa near the kitchenette, listening to Ella Fitzgerald through soft static. We didn't talk about the USB drive, or the logs, or the night everything cracked open. But before he left, he tapped the table twice and said, "You kept your word." That night, I returned to the old diner near the edge of town, the one where I used to debug alone after hours, huddled in a corner booth with bad coffee and better silence. Nancy was still there, still wearing her signature red apron, still pouring refills without asking. "Still black, no sugar?" she asked as I slid into the booth. "Always," I said. We didn't say much after that. She brought a slice of apple pie without asking. I left a 20 under the plate. In early February, I filed paperwork for a nonprofit. It wasn't flashy, no big launch, just a quiet submission to the state. I called it Firewall of Grace, a scholarship fund for young women in tech who had been told too early and too often that they didn't belong, that they weren't ready, that they should step aside. The name had come to me in the middle of the night, like most of my good code. Grace wasn't just about being kind. It was about knowing when not to fight and when to stand, even if your voice shook. The following week, I was invited to speak at a small liberal arts college 2 hours north. The lecture hall wasn't full, maybe 40 students, half of them probably there for the extra credit, but they listened, really listened. When I finished, a student in the back raised his hand. "How do you know Sentinel's still doing what it's supposed to? Like, how do you trust it?" I didn't hesitate, because it knows the difference between being smart and being right. He nodded slowly. I hoped he carried that home. As I stepped out of the building, the cold wrapped around me like a quiet answer. The snow had returned, soft flakes brushing against my coat, not in fury, but in reminder. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Sentinel alert, system activity stabilized, ethical protocols active, threats neutralized. I looked up at the sky, clouds low and silver, the streetlights casting halos across the parking lot. My breath fogged in front of me. I tilted my head at the snowy sky. Still watching? Good. Sometimes the greatest battles are won not with noise, but with quiet conviction. I didn't seek revenge. I chose to protect what mattered, proving that dignity and conscience can leave deeper imprints than ambition ever will. Kindness, even when unseen or underestimated, has a way of circling back to those who give it freely. So maybe today, instead of judging a worn coat or a quiet voice, we might pause and listen for the integrity beneath. Because just like a firewall built with grace, compassion too learns to defend what's right in its own quiet code.